Today, we're talking about practical strategies to streamline post-construction site runoff compliance. My name's Nicole Beck. I'm the CEO and founder of Second Nature. I have 20 years of stormwater expertise in science, research, and innovation. Really spend a lot of time thinking about how to help municipalities make better use of the inordinate amount of data that you all are required to collect under your MS4 permits. I'm joined today by my colleague, Chloe Hoke. She's a product manager at Second Nature. And we also have special guest Colleen Hunt, who's been in the stormwater industry for over 25 years. She's a former California State Municipal Stormwater Program regulator. And now she's principal of Stone Creek Engineering, where she supports her phase 1 and phase 2 clients to implement practical and efficient MS4 compliance programs. All right, before we get started, I want to warm everybody up with a poll. We love hearing from you all. So since we're talking about post-construction today, we take some time to rate your MS4 program's current approach to post-construction. We all have a little bit of improvement to be done in a whole range of different stages that you all are in. Our sense in talking with stormwater programs across the country is that post-construction compliance is really one of the most challenging aspects of many MS4 programs. And I think that's for several reasons. First is just this long-term maintenance and monitoring requirement, right? Once a development project is completed and the building permit has been closed out, that long-term responsibility of maintaining those stormwater assets shifts to those private landowners. And the MS4 team is now required to enforce such maintenance. They all lack visibility into those private properties, right? With no easy way to track if maintenance is happening unless they submit annual reports or your staff goes out and does field inspections, right? And both of those are pretty costly and time consuming. You also have paperwork bottlenecks and manual reporting seem to be common, where compliance processes seem to be still heavily reliant on various forms of paper and PDFs and spreadsheets, especially with limited staff. Right? We all know that y'all just don't have the people to chase down those non-compliant properties or track down the new owners as ownership changes. And if you have a staff member that's been your glue for your post-construction compliance program and they retire or move on, right, a lot of their local knowledge will disappear and walk out the door. You're faced with a pretty tough regulatory pressure. You're held accountable from your state regulators to ensure that the post-construction BMPs are built to the state design standards and then maintained in perpetuity. And God forbid your program gets audited and you have to scramble to demonstrate that proof of compliance. And then bigger than the day-to-day task challenges is really a lack of public awareness and support, right? People we're lacking an understanding of why better stormwater management is benefiting those private landowners, right, who have made these stormwater investments. And these BMPs, the assets are, they stay in the ground and that site stays in scope long after the developers are gone. So we know that as ownership changes and information gets lost in the shuffle, agencies can lose track of who's responsible and what they're responsible for. But it's not just like regulatory enforcement, right? If we keep our eyes on that bigger value, these assets protect water quality, but perhaps more importantly these days, they reduce local flood risk. Every gallon retained on a private site is one less gallon of stormwater that your municipal system is going to have to handle in the next storm. Right? And every city is facing aging, undersized MS4 stormwater systems. And so these public systems, right, they need all the help they can get. And one way to get that is well-maintained private stormwater BMPs. So we're going to bring on Colleen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always excited to talk about my roots in my career back from my regulatory days. So
Great. All right. Well, a few starting questions. How many years were you a MS4 regulator?
yes, I worked for the Regional Water Board for 18 years, and I did MS4 compliance for about 6.5 of those.
How many annual reports, MS4 annual reports, do you think you reviewed over that time period?
Best guess, I reviewed 100-ish annual reports in my time at the board.
That seems like plenty. And how about audits, in particular to the post-construction program? How many of those do you think you participated in?
Yeah, so made it an effort in my time to make sure that every MS4 permittee had an audit at least once when I was there. And then I would do some follow-ups with various municipalities. So I'd say probably about 50, maybe not full audits, but looking at going in and talking with the regulated community about compliance around their program areas, including post-construction.
And understand kind of from the regulator's perspective, what were their priorities like when you were reviewing these reports or evaluating programs? What were the key factors that you looked for in evaluating a program's compliance with post construction?
My goal was always really, can I either by reviewing an annual report or doing an audit, make the determination if the municipality are implementing the permit requirements as required. And sometimes I'd really get in to specific projects. So I do an audit and I would say, okay, I want to see these three post-construction design plans to make sure that the requirements within the permit were being implemented within the design
Hmm.
standards, and that the the local jurisdictions were seeing, it's pass through regulation, right? The state tells the city that these projects have to be designed a certain way, and then the city regulates their community to make that happen. And so it's making sure that the city's playing their role in making sure that everything is being followed in the, and then also, kind of just going through the list that you see in the post construction. So then, okay, what's your inventory? Let me see where you have projects. Um, and a lot of times the permit would have specific call outs on the types of information that needed to be tracked. And so looking at how that is being managed, is it thorough and accurate? And then the maintenance. So show me your maintenance records, or your inspections, depending on how the program's written. So really that full compliance with the permit is really the approach. And whether you're reviewing an annual report or talking to a permittee directly, you're trying to tease out, are they really meeting the intent and the requirements?
How about common compliance gaps? Like when you were, reviewing these and you encountered common issues across all these programs, what were kind of the main things that look like programs are really struggling with that you could share with the group?
Yeah, that I think this is a really important element, kind of identifying these common deficiencies, because they, especially when I was looking at these programs, and even still today in my role as a consultant, I think municipalities really struggle with the workflow of post construction requirements from the moment they get a plan, to like you had mentioned in the intro, now the building permit signed off, and there's still things to be done and to be tracked, and kind of see struggles with everything in between. Especially for small municipalities, something that was really common, and I still see as a consultant, small municipalities tend to have one person that does a lot. And so they review the plan, they're tracking the inventory, the maintenance, the whole program. And common, I think, mistake is that they just have it as institutional knowledge. So as a regulator, I go in and say, okay, where do you have post construction projects? And they would just list it off from memory. And it's like, well, where's your inventory? Like, you need to have that memorialized somewhere besides up up here, right? And that's great, they know that information, but if you don't have the inventory memorialized somewhere, that person's either going to leave, retire, get promoted, they're going to move on, and then the person that comes in is going to have really no idea where to even start. And so I'd say, like, something that's really important is, even if you think you have an inventory and it's in your mind or on a piece of paper on your desk, you need something that can be passed on to staff and accessible to staff, so that they can so that these projects can live beyond one person's tenure. And so I'd say that's
Yeah.
there's a lot of deficiencies, but it's that inventory because that's a core part of your program and making sure that that's really solid.
Real quickly, as you mentioned, and as we know, right now you're on the other side and you're helping permittees up their post-construction programs. And so can you share just real quickly what your kind of key starting points are when you enter an engagement with the municipality that wants your technical support to get their post-construction program back on track?
Yeah. So one of the first things I start with, again, it goes back to that inventory and, can we pull documents? Where can we get the information to do the backlog to make sure that the inventory is current and accurate? But then beyond that, it's really about setting up procedures to be successful and having a workflow that staff are trained on, that they know their responsibilities with, to memorialize all of this information and data that needs to be captured in order to remain compliant with the permit. And so it's developing what information needs to be tracked, where are you tracking it, who's going to track it, um, what's the training element of those procedures going to be, who's responsible for either doing the maintenance inspections, or in some permits we have, Nicole, you had mentioned like annual reporting or like certifying that the maintenance is being done. Who's going to track all that, right? It's identifying those roles and responsibilities that's almost important as the workflow itself, so that there's no breakdown. And I think once those kind of procedures are in place and everybody understands their role, you can really streamline your compliance that way. And so that's where I start, is
Yeah.
really with that workflow.
Super. Well, Colleen, thank you for joining me. We're going to see you later in the Q&As. And I think what Colleen just shared is consistent with what we've been seeing and talking to groups across the country, right? Regulators they don't need to see perfection, but they do, right? They want defensible documentation and consistency. So I've boiled it down to four main things, which I think summarize pretty well what Colleen just talked about. Making sure development complies with those minimum state design standards. Make sure that all the information about the projects and the site is up to date and accurate. You can maintain that information. Document the communications that you're having with the private landowner and that you're recording those. So you have a history of all of those, the project over time. So that if the regulator calls one project and says, hey, I'd like to understand your records here, you have that all available. And probably most importantly, have processes and procedures so that you can be proactive and address issues as they come up. Going back to the manual pieces, and this is probably what everybody assumes and understands, but manual is not scalable. But digital stormwater information systems are. And with the right system, you can streamline post-construction compliance. Your team, you're going to reduce your compliance risk, you're going to cut follow-up time and the complexity associated with that. You create reliable, centralized data that's going to add value to you and your team and your community year after year. And probably most importantly, at least from a regulatory perspective, you'll be able to stop reacting and start being proactive. So how, right? How do we do this? Well, I'm going to bring on my partner in crime here, Chloe. And we have spent some time and are to share 5 proven strategies. So I'm going to do an overview. These are the 5 strategies we're going to share. I'll review them and then we'll go through each one. The first is just tracking what matters. And I mean, Colleen said this pretty clearly, right? Establish visibility by mapping and tracking all regulated projects in GIS. GIS is just an invaluable tool to have available to build and maintain that inventory. The next is building a shared understanding, leveraging your public education and outreach requirements so that you can educate those private landowners and other stakeholders, and not just in their role in stormwater management and their compliance requirements, but why they should care about it. The next is modernizing communications. There's a lot of advanced digital tools that are available that can replace paper processes and make it much more efficient for your team to maintain those communications. Another one that we find that's really helpful for a lot of stormwater teams, I mean, y'all have got many different programs you have to keep track of the compliance tasks. And so by having a proactive task management dashboard that gives you alerts and keeps track of what's due when, it's going to make sure that nothing falls through the crack. And then the last strategy is maximizing the impact of your inspectors. Use data to guide your team's inspectors on where they're going to evaluate assets, where do they spend their limited time in the field, and give them the tools so that they can be more efficient and effective at their jobs. So we're going to dig into the first one, track what matters. So again, that building a reliable inventory of private BMPs is really the foundation of compliance. And the way that our team has learned to approach this and help teams tackle this problem and not feel so overwhelmed is start with all new projects and adopt a modern system and just inventory those as soon as the construction projects are closed out, while that information is fresh. Then tackle your legacy project data. So migrate your existing data in the variety of formats that you have into a single source of truth, a single system, and then fill those legacy project data gaps gradually using a phased data-driven approach that's based on project risk. And Chloe, why don't you take it away and show how to put these strategies into action?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. All right. So first and foremost, I'll acknowledge, admittedly, maybe my data tracking in the past has been a little bit scattered, but like Nicole said, it's time to draw that line in the sand. And moving forward, we're going to go ahead and adopt a modern digital approach to help us manage our project data moving forward. I've got my post-construction maintenance agreement right here next to me, and I'm going to go ahead and digitize all of my project data. Or if I'm leveraging a modern GIS-based system like To Inform, I can also sync that project data directly from my enterprise GIS. But for now, let's see how quickly I can add a project into my system. Nicole, you can go ahead and time me here. All right, we'll start with our project location information. I do know the address, so I'm just going to pop that address right in there. And there's my project. All right. You can see all of this information automatically populates for us, which is fantastic. And I do know that there's also an asset related to my project, so I want to add that into the system as well. Again, I'll just point that location here. And now I can select the asset type from this set dropdown. And based on the type, you can see down at the bottom here, we've got tons of information on the key design specifications and sizing details that matter most for this specific asset. I also want to add in some contact information, so I can go ahead and add that. I can select from a list of contact types and this standardized dropdown. Again, based on that type, I can enter in my key information, and this is going to come in handy when we get into the communications portion of things. And no worries, if I don't have the plans in front of me and I don't have all of this information, I can always leverage my available parcel data to look up ownership information, and I can always run a quick Google search on the property or the address to find out some more details. And finally, let's go ahead and pop the plan that I'm looking at right into our system too. So again, we'll select from a set dropdown of file types to make sure we're keeping everything in order. And what we see is a lot of groups are using things like SharePoint or Google Drive or other file management systems to store these documentations, and that's fantastic, and we want to support that. And so what we typically recommend is just copy that direct link from your file system right here, and we can have that accessible, really easy for future access and future reference. And now all of our project data is right here in one spot. My team doesn't have to go hunting across all our different systems to access these key project details, and I've set ourselves up for success moving forward. Didn't take too long, did it, Nicole?
No, 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Good job.
I'll take it.
Okay. All right. So now, how about those legacy projects that we have and all the information? Can you share how we migrate our existing data and some strategies to fill data gaps and not be so overwhelmed with building that out?
Yeah, totally. So we've drawn that line in the sand. We know our individual projects are good moving forward, but like you said, Nicole, we got to handle all of our legacy data. So this is where there's a huge benefit to having a modern digital system like To Inform. It can really speed things up, and I can do a lot more with a lot less effort. So if you're like me, maybe you have a spreadsheet already with all of your project data. you can go ahead and pop that right into the system, and all of your legacy project data can come in one go. And with that, we'll be set up with everything in the same system that we're committing to using moving forward. And we're no longer worried about our data being siloed in a bunch of different places, and we're digital from here on out.
Super. And if I have some of that data in GIS, I can just bring that in as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really easy to get that point location right from the address. There's a bunch of tools available that makes it super easy to get those points on the map.
Super.
Awesome. So now, assuming that we have all of our data in there, I'm not sure everything is populated exactly the way that I need, but instead of randomly spot checking all of my projects or just being so overwhelmed that I don't even want to start, we can again use these digital tools to do a lot of that heavy lifting. And I don't have too many projects here, but I've seen groups with hundreds and hundreds of projects with incomplete data, and that is okay. That is normal. We all have to start somewhere, but the getting started part is the part that really matters. So with this digital system, right, it's based on standardized data requirements, which means it can easily tell me exactly which projects are missing which pieces of information. And I can focus on those most critical bits of information that I need for my post-construction program. But before we just go one by one down this list and spend all of our time filling each and every data gap, we should focus our efforts on where it matters the most. So let's check out the map view. So if I'm exploring my data on the map, I can see a cluster of projects down here that have a bunch of missing information. And I also know that this area happens to be an area within my MS4 that is prone to flooding. So it's really important to me to fill those data gaps here. So let's check it out. If we click on a project, I can see I'm missing some key contact information here, but that should be a pretty easy fix. And now I have a targeted strategy to be able to focus my team's research efforts and gradually improve my data quality over time. And I can systematically move towards a more comprehensive project inventory and asset inventory as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. We've heard from our users that this two-pronged approach really helps them feel less overwhelmed. Draw a line in the sand, start with the new projects, get those inventoried as they come online, and then tackle that backlog of legacy projects. So thanks for sharing that. Another strategy that we've heard that really resonates with MS4 teams who are working to modernize their post-construction program is to launch a focused public education and outreach campaign for a short period of time so that they can boost the effectiveness of their post-construction program. So we want to talk just a little bit about that, right? And work to build a shared understanding of the purpose and the value of better managed stormwater. The first step is just we start with the why, right? Show how BMP maintenance or structural control measure maintenance protects property and the community, right? Link the efforts to outcomes like reducing flooding and cleaner waterways. Use tools that scale. So spend some time thinking about how to incorporate resources, develop those communication tools, and use your city website, social media, and particularly flyers, right? So you can reach more landowners without overburdening your staff, right? You can create valuable and informative resources that can be used and reused to generate a lot of public education and outreach impressions, but it doesn't necessarily mean extra work for your team, right? And you're giving them better resources to communicate why the stormwater maintenance matters. And then track your efforts for credit. And so, Chloe, why don't you take some time here and show us how we can log these outreach activities to show our regulators the commitment and the focus of public education and outreach on improving the effectiveness of our post-construction program.
Awesome, sure thing. So yeah, speaking of communicating the why, we have a lovely flyer here that maybe your program has spent a lot of time creating some documentation or a stormwater flyer or outreach content that can provide a ton of information on best practices for asset maintenance, the benefits of green infrastructure, and you can even include information about incentive programs and other information that might be relevant for post-construction. You can share this at events, you can include it in your mailouts, and you can share it with all of your stakeholders to help boost your education and outreach efforts. All right, so we'd want to do that education, but we also want to get credit for our efforts. And again, we want to move away from that kind of random acts of outreach and more more towards a specific targeted messaging effort that's going to maximize our impact and our behavior change. So let's go ahead and log this flyer as an outreach activity. Again, we can select from a standardized dropdown, and you can see that as I enter in my information, the form dynamically responds, and that makes sure that we're entering the right data that matters most for this specific activity. I'll pop in some more information, and now we can get into the details about what type of target audience that we're going after. We want to focus on property owners, making sure we're focusing on stormwater volume, stormwater pollution. And we want to target behavior change relative to low impact development. And what's really helpful about having all of these forms standardized is now I can make sure that my data is quality, and the folks that are entering this data are entering it in a scalable way. And we'll see how that standardization pays off in a second. Also, Nicole, you mentioned impressions, so that's important for me to track too. And if I send my flyer out to, say, my 1,000 projects, then I can assume that I've made at least 1,000 impressions as well. Finally, for consistency's sake, I can link that document here, or I can upload it directly. And now it's there and available for my team. I can clone it year after year and continue with this outreach effort. And now I want to see how this can roll up across all of our education and outreach activities. All right, so we all know there's a time of year when that annual reporting time comes around, and now we have to compile all of our data for each of our programs, and that can seem really daunting. So again, taking advantage of a modern digital system, it can do a lot of that work for you already behind the scenes. And so since we've entered our activity data with those standardized forms that we were looking at, now we can see this aggregated roll-up of impressions and touch points across all of our efforts in this reporting year. And when it comes time to summarize for my annual report, I've got quite a head start here. I can go ahead and copy paste this right into my report, or I can use some of the tabular summaries or even export this data to a spreadsheet and configure it however I like. And now two things are happening. One, I'm personally becoming way more efficient. I'm letting the digital solution do a lot of that tracking, roll up, and reporting. And two, my program is becoming more effective because now I have consistent, targeted public education and outreach efforts.
I'm going to move on to the next one. Modernizing how you communicate, right? Manual communication, it wastes time and it's bogging teams down from what we can see. Using, again, advanced digital tools to be able to streamline this communication and keep track of those records, huge value, huge ROI to your group. So we have three main things that we're going to share here. The first is just automating those annual maintenance notices. If that is, one of the workflows that your group is relying upon is to send annual notices to private landowners, you can use templates and generate hundreds of notices in minutes instead of weeks. So Chloe is going to show us that. Similarly, online forms and modern tools to make it as easy as possible for your owners to respond. And then now, because we are using a modern system, organized, operable data, you can automatically analyze those results. And so Chloe's going to share one concept, one metric that can be really useful to track the effectiveness of your post-construction program as you're making these improvements. So go ahead, Chloe, take it away here.
Awesome. All right, so it's that time of year, time to send out all of our annual maintenance notices. And this year I'm going to go ahead and skip all of the manual letter writing. I'm going to get out of Microsoft Word. And again, I'm going to let the software do a lot of that heavy lifting for me. So let's take a look at a project here. Because a digital system like To Inform already has all this project information, in order to generate the letter, all I need to do is specify who I want to send it to and when I want them to respond. And I'll go ahead and give them a couple months, give them till the beginning of the summer, and then I can sign it and I'm done. This will automatically generate my maintenance notice PDF, and it's got all the project specific information included in it. I can configure it like Nicole mentioned with my logo, any introductory instructions, important expectations for maintenance. Can even add links to my website or other requirements. And whether you choose to forward this PDF along via email or print it out and stuff it in an envelope, this outreach is a great place to share those educational resources like the flyer that we were talking about. And you know what? Some groups have way more projects than this, so why don't we just do this in bulk? We can also go ahead and select all of the projects, and let's just generate them in one go. And again, it's just as easy. All we have to do is now select that contact type that we want to send it to, select that due date, and this will apply to all of our projects. And with that, you'll be able to clear out your to-do list and earn plenty of your time back to focus on a ton of other tasks at hand. How's that for efficiency, Nicole?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was just talking to a group, I think this week or last week, and they called it maintenance month. So they send all their maintenance notices out in a particular month, and then get it, wait for them to trickle back in. So easy, make that easier. Okay, so now the private landowner, right? When they receive those responses, can you show us that workflow and what they experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we saw how easy it can be to generate these letters on the MS4 end, but there's also a lot of benefits to be reaped for making the lives of the private landowners a lot easier as well. So let's now put on our private landowner hat. We've just received this letter from the MS4. And now I can reference also, maybe they've attached the flyer and I can see that too. So I know exactly what maintenance I need to do, and I can check out exactly what assets are on my property. So it's also a good reminder that a lot of private landowners are only seeing these forms once a year. And so it's helpful to have a lot of that context information. And we can even reference the site maps that are available so they know exactly where to orient themselves. And this is really empowering them to be more effective with their maintenance efforts. So let's say we went ahead, followed those instructions, completed all of our maintenance, and now we're ready to submit our response. We've got the nice QR code here, or I can just click on the link. And this opens up a form that's unique to my project. And again, includes all of the reference instructions and project details, and it tells me exactly what I'm on the hook to respond with. So I'll enter my information here, indicate I've maintained my assets, add some comments, maybe add a little more detail. I can add photos directly from my device as well, and even attach any files or any other reports that I want to add as well. All I've got to do is sign that and submit. And honestly, I think that's even easier than paying for a parking ticket because I didn't even have to pull out my wallet.
Perfect. Save money and time.
There we go.
All right. So how about the track effectiveness KPI? That one is, yeah.
Yeah. So now we're back in the office. We are back to our stormwater manager role. We're sitting back, relaxing. All these digital responses are flowing in from private landowners. But the system can do a lot more than just track those responses. It can also provide a ton of analytics based on all of that data. So one metric that we see a lot of groups focusing on are these response rates of how many notices have you sent out and how many responses have you received back. In the chart here, it can compare year to year. On the right, we have last year. And then on the left-hand side, we have this year. And we can see I've sent out even more maintenance notices this year. Maybe that's because I'm really chipping away at those data gaps and that's paying off. And you can also see I'm already receiving more responses than I did last year. And the year's not even over, so I'm expecting a lot more responses as well. And as I continue to fill my data gaps and lean into that targeted education and outreach, I'm hopeful to see these response rates continue to increase over time, which will be fantastic. And just as a reminder, this could be just one of many metrics that we have in our dashboards that can really help us to glean those insights and better understand trends over time that relate both to the effort for your program and the effectiveness ultimately of your post-construction program.
Next one, the proactive task management, right? With a lot of empathy for y'all. You got tons of moving parts. We're talking about one program, but you have at least 6, if not 8 to 10 different programs you got to keep track of every year. With respect to post-construction, Chloe's going to share a few pieces of a system that tracks all the details. So first is tracking those maintenance responses. You want to stay on top of who's responded and who hasn't. Assign and schedule follow-ups and automated reminders so that you and your team, like, nothing's fallen through the cracks and you don't have to worry about sticky notes and to-do lists that are on a piece of paper anymore. And then when needed, You can easily issue warning letters or notice of violations and track any enforcements by project. And all of that's going to happen in the same system. So go ahead, Chloe.
Awesome. So yeah, we've seen we're sending notices, we're receiving those responses all in the same system. And that makes my process to review those responses a ton easier as well. So let's check it out here. All right, so because these responses are submitted digitally, I can immediately be notified via email or in the tool that there are new projects here that have responded and are ready for my review. So let's go ahead and take a look, and we can see exactly what they've submitted in their digital response. So now I can see they've confirmed all the maintenance has been done. They've added their detailed comments and photos and maybe even attached supplemental reports. And this looks great. So I can just approve that information and it's all saved with the click of a button. And that's in the same system where I don't have to manage any of it. And we're done with the project until next year. All right, but let's say now that due date may have passed, and maybe there's some folks I haven't heard back from. So let's check in on those for the projects that we haven't gotten a response yet. And one strategy that we see with a lot of groups that we work with is that they will just send a reminder notice to these kind of late responders, giving them an extra, say, 30-day grace period. And in fact, we can even generate those maintenance reminders all in one go using the same tools that we did before. So go ahead and enter that reminder. And all we've got to do is say who we want to send it to and when we want to respond. And maybe we'll just go ahead and give them that extra 30-day grace period. But let's fast forward and say, maybe they didn't hit that 30-day grace period. It passed, we still haven't had any response from them. Maybe that's a good indication that it's time to dig into my contact information and make sure that I have the right responsible party. All right, so there's another case too, right, where we do get a response from the private party, but maybe it's incomplete, or I can clearly see that there's some non-compliant issues that are present. Fortunately, again, if you have a modern digital solution, something like To Inform, you can easily send those follow-up maintenance notice reminders like we said, or I can send my staff out for on-site re-inspections and make sure that we stay on top of all of those open issues, and again, making sure none of our projects are slipping through the cracks. And if despite further re-inspections and all of our other efforts, if we're still seeing those persistent non-compliant issues, or if something really egregious pops up, we always have our MS4s enforcement response plan available in our back pocket. And if it's warranted, we can go ahead and issue or escalate those enforcements as needed.
Thanks, Chloe. Appreciate that one. And here we are to the last one. And this one I really like. This has come about from talking with a lot of different groups about the cost and the time of sending inspectors. And so having a strategy to maximize the impact of your inspectors, right? They are the stormwater BMP experts. Chloe's going to show how to use data to prioritize where your staff will conduct those inspections, and so that they're assessing the performance of assets and providing their expert maintenance guidance on the highest risk sites. Also providing your inspectors with digital tools and accurate inspections that'll help them eliminate their post-processing hours back at the office, right, where they have to a lot of times upload photos and manually enter data, et cetera. So you want to keep your staff in your field crew as efficient as possible. By doing this all in a centralized system and keeping a history of those related projects, right, it makes it really easy to overcome some of those institutional knowledge challenges that Colleen was talking about. Go ahead, Chloe. Let's get through this one real quick.
All right, sounds good. So with all of my data in our digital solution, like Nicole was mentioning, right, we want to make sure those inspections are also digital. And first things first, right, we know we can't go everywhere. I don't have enough staff or enough time to make it on site to every project every year. So I need to zero in on the most critical projects where there are these private assets that I know need to perform their best. And again, we talked about this earlier. I know this area of town down here is super prone to flooding. And maybe there's a couple other large scale assets around town that I want to make sure my team inspects with their own eyes. So with a modern digital system, I'm able to set up that logic and the software does the rest for me. So I can clearly direct my team to these specific projects and make sure that their limited time is spent where it matters most. So let's get in and do some of those inspections, all right? So if we're using a digital tool, now we can collect standardized, repeatable inspections that are tailored to the specific asset type. In this case, I'm looking at buyer retention, so I know I'm collecting information that's key for that type. Can fill in some data gaps. I can even enter notes or add inspection photos right from my field device. And when it comes time to evaluate that maintenance, the form will automatically populate again with those type-specific maintenance tasks. And this gives me a standardized way to keep track of exactly what is needed on site. Awesome. So this is great because it makes my maintenance recommendations digital from the very start, and it's really clear to the private landowner exactly what they're responsible for. And I can even generate these automated inspection PDF reports that include all of those details, all of the maintenance that's needed, any photos or notes, and it gives all that power back to the private landowner so that they can do their best maintenance and we can have a win-win situation. The most important thing now that we're all leveraging the same system is that the data is now accessible to everyone. So I can get the full picture of what's going on in every project within my MS4. I can even explore contact information and files and all of the history across all the different lines of communication, both at the project and the asset scale. Even got my photos here for reference. And now anyone on my team, myself, anyone else who joins the team in the future, they can all access this data too. And with a system of record like this, I don't have to worry about losing that institutional knowledge. The days of manual data compilation are behind me, and all of my data is right where I need it.
At your fingertips. All right. Thanks, Chloe. We've seen how a modern system will streamline workflows, right? But the real impact is going to be on the ROI to you and your teams, right? You can onboard folks faster. You save hundreds of hours eliminating these manual processes and reduce data errors. You're going to cut reporting time. Some have said in half or more. And you're going to reduce your compliance risk, right? And that's going to free up time and resources. And honestly, your team's like mental energy, right? If you eliminate those drudgery tasks and those manual tasks, that's going to really allow you and your team to drive strategic improvements and focus on what really matters. And the post-construction requirements across the country have been effective. What we see is upwards of 80% of the structural BMPs in any community are privately owned. And there's a real untapped potential in the private stormwater systems that are already in the ground, right? As storms grow more frequent and more intense, and the aging, undersized infrastructure, public infrastructure, is stressed thin, right? Flood risks are rising and they're rising fast. And I mean, we see in the news every day, no community is immune. And we're also seeing research and studies that are saying they're putting multi-billion-dollar price tags on for a single county or state to address their aging, undersized stormwater systems and manage this flood risk. And so we're seeing cities across the country proactively, they're raising their stormwater design standards. Got a couple on the East Coast, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Portland, Maine, from the 25-year storm to the 100-year storm, right? They're getting more from those private development requirements. They're offering stormwater utility credits or capital grants, right? We're looking to incentivize private landowners to invest in stormwater management and being proactive, right? And planning ahead. And so a modern post-construction program can really help you take your stormwater program beyond this compliance, right? And then it becomes the backbone really for smarter proactive planning. So we really want to help groups and teams ensure that your communities are better prepared and can stay ahead of the next storm that's coming. We have our question and answer. Oh, we're on it. Okay, so we want to start the Q&A with a quick poll.
There's a nice split looking like the automated task management, automated communications with private landowners, and getting a handle on that GIS inventory is what seems to be bubbling up to the top here.
All right, well, with the Q&A, Colleen, I got one for you. A group it looks like they're working on improving their post-construction program to boost compliance, but they realize that takes time. And so do you have any advice on how to best communicate their intentions to the state regulator?
Yeah, I think that's communication is probably one of the most important elements if you're feeling like you're not in compliance, but you have a plan. that is going to go a really long way. And so if you're able to maybe set up a 1 hour check-in with your regulator, show them your plan, schedule. I think that's a really important thing, that you have some endpoint that you're working towards, where you will be able to turn and say, we feel we have met the goal and the compliance metrics for the permit, and that you're really showing effort. I think regulators, where you're going to get in trouble is doing nothing. That's really low hanging fruit for enforcement, because there's really no arguing with level of effort if it's been nothing. So if you have a plan, you have intentions, good intentions of moving forward, and you are showing progress and effort, and you can communicate that to your regulator, that's going to go a really long way, because your regulator is going to say, okay, I'm going to go look for those groups that are just doing nothing, and let the groups that are putting in the effort put in their effort and establish compliance.
It makes you remember that regulators are people too. Just have to communicate and collaborate with them. Chloe, there's a question that came in about the data. So I have my data in a bunch of different formats in a spreadsheet. What do I need to do before I just kind of drag and drop it like you showed? Can you give a little more guidance as to what happens there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll pull up that screen so we can take a look. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's kind of two primary components. The first is just making sure that we're lining up those data fields. So we know we have our ID in the right column. We know what's our latitude, what's our longitude. And once we make sure that we line up all of those fields and those columns, then we want to start to look at the specific values here. And we saw throughout the tool today, when you're using a modern digital system, you have those set drop downs, which makes it really helpful so that you can classify and tag all these projects appropriately. And it helps you be able to roll up this data across all of your bits of your program. So you can see here, making sure that we're using these standardized drop down. We're not worried about spelling commercial wrong, and we're really cleaning up our data values. So the two part is just clean up those field columns and then clean up the values, and then you're good to go, and you can drag and drop and be on your merry way.
But I have one more here, which is a common question that we get. Can this program sync with other platforms? Certainly, right? We talk a lot about not siloing data, and so our first answer is we fully integrate with your ArcGIS system at your agency, whether it's ArcGIS Online or Enterprise. We talk GIS and Esri really well. So we make sure that those two systems are in sync. So whether your GIS team or changes are being made in your GIS system or in To-Inform, again, we don't want to silo data anymore. And then integration from there to different types of systems, it depends what they are. We've done a bunch of different ways because we don't want folks, again, to silo data anymore. So love to talk with you about your system integration questions and challenges. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to continue the conversation. And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Colleen and Chloe, for joining me. And